The Cursed Crimson Grimoire Part 2. Chapter 13. The Mirror of Regret. The woman who called herself a first reader told Elias where to look. Not in riddles. Not in metaphors. Just a name and a place. The next item is waiting at Milo House, an estate that burned down in 1911 and reopened its doors last week. She handed him a photograph, sepia-toned, slightly curled, the edges browned with age. In the center stood a tall, thin mirror in a wrought iron frame. It had no reflection. Instead, the glass appeared to ripple, like still water beneath grief. Written in faded ink along the bottom corner: "The regret that watches." The address was in a rural town 2 hours away. Elias took the train at dusk, traveling with a worn leather satchel, a flashlight, a notebook, and a single page torn from the grimoire, one with his name written in red. The farther he rode, the quieter the world became. And when he arrived, the silence felt intentional. Milo House was an old ruin. 3 stories of scorched timber and stone, once a manor, now rebuilt, but only on the surface. The walls were too perfect. The floorboards didn't creak. The windows didn't fog. It felt like a memory pretending to be a place. A woman greeted him at the gate. Gray dress. Pale skin. Her eyes looked painted on. "You were expected," she said, and handed him a key. The tag tied to it read, "North Wing. Do not knock on the mirror's frame." The room was cold. Not cold like winter, but like disappointment. Like the air that comes after crying. And there it was. The mirror. 7 feet tall. Obsidian frame etched with small glyphs. The glass held no reflection, only shadow. When Elias stepped in front of it, the outline of his body vanished. Only the shape of his regret remained. It didn't show Lena. It didn't show the crash. It showed something worse. The day before the fight. The screaming. The moment she walked out of the apartment, and he let her, saying nothing. In the mirror, he watched it replay. But not as it was. As it could have been. Her turning back. Him running after her. The apology. The hug. The moment that never happened, reflected like a scar that might have healed. He turned away. But the mirror followed. It didn't move. The room did. Each wall, each surface, mirrored. And each one reflected a different moment of regret. His mother's last phone call, ignored. The friend he abandoned. The day he told Lena he didn't want kids, when he actually did. Each reflection whispered softly. Not in words, but in emotions. Grief. Shame. Loneliness. A voice echoed from the hallway. Most people stay. They think they can rewrite what they see. But the mirror doesn't lie. It only watches. It was the woman in the gray dress. She stepped into the room now, her face expressionless. "But you're not here to reflect," she said. "You're here to remove." Elias stepped forward. "What is it?" She looked at the mirror like one might look at an old lover. "It's the devil's second gift. A trap for those who would trade their soul for one more chance to undo a moment. And how do I destroy it?" "You can't destroy what's already happened," she said. "But you can unmake its witness." She placed a blade in his hand. Its hilt was bound in old pages. Its edge was chipped bone. "Don't stab the glass," she said. "Stab your reflection." Elias turned toward the mirror. And now, it did show him. Not regret. Not grief. Him. But smiling. Triumphant. Whole. "I could give you peace," the reflection said. "You just have to stop fighting. You don't have to hurt anymore." Elias looked down at the blade. And thought of Lena. The real Lena. Not a version created by the book. not a comfort. The truth. He drove the blade into the mirror. Into himself. The glass didn't shatter. It bled. Ink and memory. Screams and silence. The reflection shrieked as it dissolved. The mirror trembled once, and turned to ash. When Elias turned around, the woman was gone. Only the key remained, dropped at the door. And written on the back. One item removed. The story rewrites itself. To remain. Chapter 14. The Hand That Writes You. Elias didn't remember the train ride home. He remembered the mirror bleeding. He remembered the scream, his scream, and the one behind the glass. He remembered the weight lifting from his chest, as if a wound had finally been named and lanced. But the journey back? It passed like a dream half recalled. Shadows blurred outside the window. His name felt strange in his mouth. One item removed. The story rewrites itself. The words echoed, even now. What did it mean? He reached his apartment just after midnight. The hallway was too still. The kind of stillness that feels staged. Inside, the air had changed. The lights were already on. The door to the chest that once held the grimoire was open. But the book was gone. Instead, pages, hundreds of them, were pinned to the walls, taped to the floor, fanned out across every surface. Every single one bore his handwriting. Except he hadn't written them. He stepped closer to one page taped to the wall above the sink. It read, "He steps into the kitchen, uncertain, his fingers twitching like they've forgotten how to hold anything but guilt." He froze. His fingers twitched. Not because he meant to, but because they had to. Another page near the window read. He looks to his left, instinctively, drawn by a sound he can't name. And before he knew it, he turned. Exactly as written? Exactly as read? A new horror dawned on him. The grimoire wasn't recording anymore. It was predicting. No, controlling. He ran to the bathroom mirror. His reflection stared back, him, yes. Tired. Pale. But behind his eyes? Something was watching. Like his soul had been placed slightly off-center. He tore pages from the walls. Burned them in the sink. But more appeared, fluttering down like leaves from nowhere, each line detailing what he was doing in real time. He rips the pages, mouth trembling. But he knows it's too late. He breathes faster now. The panic sets in. The house grows smaller around him. He doesn't know it yet, but someone is writing this chapter with his bones. He found the grimoire again that night. Not in the chest. Not on the desk. In his hand. He didn't remember picking it up. But it was open. The page was blank, and a quill sat beside it, carved from ash wood and bone. The inkpot pulsed faintly, a heart made of spilled blood. At the top of the page, a title began to write itself. Chapter 15. The One Who Writes Back. And below that, "Now it's your turn, Elias. Pick up the pen." Chapter 15. The One Who Writes Back. The pen trembled in Elias's fingers. Not from fear. From weight. It felt like holding a bone that remembered too much. When he pressed its tip to the page, the ink pulsed, thick and dark as old blood, warm as breath. The grimoire's parchment seemed to ripple under his touch, alive, expectant. He hesitated. And then, slowly, deliberately, he began to write. "The book stops writing me. The words on the page no longer bind me. I write my own future now. I am free." For a moment, the page remained still. Then the ink began to smear. Not with water. With resistance. The letters twisted, reversed, scratched themselves out. The book rejected his truth, rewrote it. The lines shifted before his eyes, reshaping his intent. The book stops writing him. The words on the page no longer bind him. He believes he is free. And beneath it, in fresh crimson ink, but freedom is just a story the damned tell themselves. Elias dropped the pen. The grimoire snapped shut with a sound like teeth clamping down. And the air in the room shifted, as if exhaling in amusement. He backed away. Looked at the page he had written. Then at the walls. New pages were forming. Appearing from the shadows, sliding out from cracks, tucked into books that hadn't been opened in years. Each one told a different version of him. Elias the coward. Elias the martyr. Elias the traitor. Elias the son who never cried at the funeral. Elias the man who let Lena die. Each one described his story in vivid, damning detail. And yet, none of them were true. Or maybe all of them were. He screamed. Gathered the pages. Set fire to them in the sink. Watched them curl and blacken. But as each page turned to ash, it whispered in a voice that sounded like him. You can't unwrite what the reader remembers. Desperate, Elias opened the grimoire again. A single page had been marked with a ribbon. He turned to it. The title read, The Author's Test. And below it, an instruction. To write truth into the book, you must first extract the lie from your soul. He didn't know what it meant. Until the pen appeared in his hand again. And this time, the book opened to a mirror. Not glass. Not reflection. Ink. An ink mirror. Showing him himself, but with nothing hidden. He saw everything. Every regret he buried. Every compromise. Every moment he could have changed something, and didn't. He saw what he'd become, shaped by wishes, by fear, by silence. And if he wanted to write his future into the grimoire, he would have to put that truth into words. He would have to bleed it onto the page. But the grimoire was waiting for him to fail. To choke on the truth. To break. He picked up the pen. Placed the tip to the page. And wrote 3 words. I let her. The room went silent. The walls stopped breathing. And for the first time since this began, the page stayed written. Chapter 16. The story that shouldn't be finished. The ink on the page still glistened. I let her. 3 words. His truth. The moment he wrote them, something shifted in the book. The blood-red script stopped moving. The margins stopped bleeding. And in the silence that followed, Elias felt seen. Not by a person. Not even by the devil. But by the book itself. It had recognized something it hadn't expected. Integrity. Then, without warning, the grimoire turned its own pages. Fast. Hundreds of parchment leaves fluttered like wings. Until it stopped. On a page thick with age. Older than the rest. The ink here was black, not red. The lines were faded, blurred. And the title at the top was written in a language Elias didn't recognize, until he blinked. Then it shifted. Translated itself. Revealed its true name. The one who burns the binding. Beneath the title, a paragraph shimmered into focus. It read, This is the first story. The one that began the collection. The one never finished. Never bound. Never signed. Because the author fled the final word. And what remains is a wound in every page that came after. Finish it, and the collection breaks. Or writes you in its place. Elias's heart pounded. He stared at the page. It was blank beneath the paragraph. Waiting. Open, too open. Because as he looked deeper into the paper, he saw not parchment, but a place. A room. A memory. An event. Suddenly, he was no longer in his apartment. He was inside the story. The first story. A stone chapel stood before him, crumbling, ancient, the air thick with soot and sorrow. Candles burned down to nubs. The altar was black with char. And in the center of the room, tied to a pillar of salt and ash, was a woman in a bridal veil. Her wrists were bound with thread. Her mouth sewn shut. She turned her head toward him. And Elias knew her name without anyone speaking it, Delphira. The first author. The one who made the first wish. The one who tried to seal the devil in a book, and failed. Around her, shadowed figures loomed, priest-like, stitched into their own robes. Each held a different object. A mirror. A dress. A page with no ink. A crimson key. Artifacts. The first cursed items. All bound to this unfinished tale. All born from this moment. Delphira tried to speak. Tried to scream. But the thread across her lips pulsed, stitched not with thread, but with names. Hundreds of them. And Elias saw his own name, half-formed, among them. The book whispered in his ear. Finish her story. Write what she could not. Complete the first chapter, and inherit the ink. A new pen appeared in his hand. Different than before. Not bone. But obsidian. Cold. Heavy. When he held it, the walls shook. And from somewhere behind him, the devil's voice murmured low and pleased. Go ahead, Elias. Be the one who burns the binding. Set us all free, or set us on fire. He stepped toward the altar. The first page of the first story waited to be written. And the ink was already forming at the tip. Chapter 17. The Ink That Bleeds Back. The pen in Elias's hand pulsed once. Not with warmth, but with resistance. Like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The obsidian nib dripped ink, thick and dark as oil, yet shimmering faintly with glints of gold and red. It wasn't resting in an inkpot. It was drawing from somewhere else. From him. From memory. From the unfinished things buried in the roots of the collection. He stood before Delphira. Her eyes, ashen gray, cracked with fire, locked onto his as if daring him to fail. The stitched veil across her mouth twitched. So many names sewn into the thread. Each one a reader. A wisher. A victim. A contributor. And somewhere, nearly complete, but not quite, his own name shimmered on the very edge of the seam. Elias opened the book. A blank page waited. But as he sat, the world around him changed. The altar stretched outward, the shadows deepened, and whispers began to crawl through the stones. Not words. Memories. He never finished us. She fled before the final vow. We were meant to burn. Why didn't she let us burn? The unfinished story was not empty. It was writhing. Alive with characters half made. Spells half cast. Consequences never paid. Elias began to write. His hand shook, but the pen obeyed. Delphira stood at the altar, the devil behind her, the artifacts surrounding her, and knew that if she spoke, the price would be eternal. So she did not speak. The pen dug deeper. But silence is not surrender. And unspoken words are still words. The ink sizzled. The ground trembled. Delphira's eyes widened. The veil twitched again. And Elias kept writing. She took the book in her hands and tore the seal from its spine. Not to bind evil, but to absorb it. To carry it where no one else could. Blood welled up from the pages. It was no longer just ink. It was memory, leaking into the world. And Delphira. She began to move. She stepped down from the altar, the thread at her mouth unraveling on its own, hissing as the names dissolved into black smoke. One by one, the cursed artifacts around her began to collapse into ash. The mirror cracked and sighed. The key snapped in two. The page with no ink began to scream. Elias wrote faster. She carried the weight of the collection inside her. She bore the curse not as victim, but as author. And in that choice, she became something worse than the devil had feared, an ending. The world shook. The grimoire snapped violently in Elias's lap. And Delphira, fully freed now, turned to him. But her face was no longer her own. It was shifting. Becoming his. The devil's voice, amused and cruel, slithered through the collapsing walls. Ah, you wrote yourself into the first curse. You gave the story a name. Now it wants to be you. Elias stumbled back, the pen still in his hand, burning hot now. The page he had written, nearly complete, began to pulse like a living heart. Delphira's body cracked open with light. And the book in her hands burst into flame. Finish the final line, the grimoire whispered. Or become the next forgotten author. Elias raised the pen one last time. And wrote. She ended the story not with silence, but with fire. The world exploded. Flames surged upward. The veil disintegrated. The unfinished tale screamed as it was sealed at last. When Elias opened his eyes, he was back in his apartment. Collapsed beside the grimoire. Smoke curled from the pages. One line was now etched at the very beginning of the book, in gold. Delphira burned to bind the collection. Elias wrote to light the match. And beneath that, 2 cursed items remain. The story continues. Chapter 18. The Devil Sends a Gift. Elias knew something was wrong the moment he opened his eyes. The air had changed. Not colder, warmer. Like breath on the back of the neck. Like something living had joined the room while he slept and chosen not to leave. The grimoire lay where it always did now, on the table, its crimson cover scarred from what he'd done to it. Smoke still curled from the edges of the Delphira chapter. It hadn't gone out completely. But something else was in the room. Watching. Waiting. And it didn't belong to the book. He stepped into the hallway, heart pounding. Every mirror in the apartment had fogged. The television was on, snow screen. Even though he hadn't plugged it in. And on the counter, wrapped neatly in black lace and red ribbon, sat a box. No tag. No sender. Just a note, resting on top. In that same delicate, infernal script. Congratulations, Elias. You've earned your next story. He stared at it. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Because the moment he laid eyes on the box, he felt it, pulling at something inside him. Like a hook snagged on a buried memory. Not pain. Not fear. Something older. A question. What if this one can't be unwritten? He opened the note. Inside was a card. A single phrase burned into the paper. The music box of what might have been. Below it, play me. He didn't touch the box. Not yet. He turned to the grimoire. Opened it. The pages flipped fast, eager, breathless. It stopped on a new chapter title. The song that writes its listener. And below that. This story begins whether or not you believe in music. Elias looked back at the box. And now, it was open. He hadn't touched it. But the lid had lifted. And the small, delicate music box ballerina had risen, arms poised mid-spin, head tilted ever so slightly toward him. And it was playing. Not aloud. Not yet. In his mind. A song he knew but couldn't name. One he used to hum in childhood, when he was scared. One that never existed, except in dreams. He staggered back. His ears began to ring. He covered them. The ballerina's spin slowed. And now, she looked at him. Eyes that had no business being on a toy. Lena's eyes. The walls pulsed. The grimoire hissed. Pages began to flip wildly, without his hand. And then, without warning, a voice filled the apartment. Not from the box. Not from the book. From everywhere. Warm. Sweet. Cruel. Did you think the collection wouldn't sing back? The lights went out. And from every mirror in the apartment, Elias heard the faint sound of feet dancing. He grabbed the grimoire. But it wouldn't close. It pulsed in his arms, pages wide open, ink streaming across the floor like spilled wine. It was writing on its own now. Too fast. Too much. Too alive. The chapter unfurled before his eyes. The listener descends. He played the song. He didn't mean to. But he played it anyway. And now, the music writes him, one dance at a time. He turned to the box. The ballerina was gone. And from the far end of the hallway, in the shadows near the closet door, someone twirled. A silhouette. Graceful. Silent. Floating an inch off the ground. She danced closer. And with each spin, the room darkened. The ink climbed the walls. And Elias realized the third cursed item wasn't an object. It was a performance. And now, he was on stage. Chapter 19. The Memory in the Melody. The dancer floated closer. Not walking. Not stepping. Spinning. A perfect pirouette on air. Her form was draped in a tattered red dress, the kind little girls wore in recitals long forgotten. Her face was blurred by motion, except for the eyes. Still. Unmoving. Lena's eyes. But he knew it wasn't her. Not truly. This thing had borrowed her gaze. Stitched it into itself. Just like the devil had stitched names into Delphra's veil. The music box still played, its soundless tune winding deeper into his head. He didn't hear it with his ears. It echoed inside his skull, weaving itself between memory and thought. He staggered toward the box, desperate. The ballerina twitched, her spin stuttering. A crack formed along her porcelain cheek. Elias reached out and slammed the lid shut. Instant silence. He fell to his knees. Breathless. Sweating. The ink that had been spilling across the floor evaporated instantly. The dancer in the hallway froze. Then vanished. And then came the cost. He looked up at the bookshelf. Paused. Something was missing. There had been a framed photo on the second shelf. One he looked at every morning. His mother. Smiling. It was gone. Not just from the shelf. From his mind. He could no longer recall her voice. Or the shape of her hands. He only knew her name. And that she had once been real. He backed away from the box, horrified. The grimoire pulsed on the table, its next chapter writing itself in real time. The listener mutes the melody. Every time he closes the lid, the box takes a song back with it. And he forgets the verse. There are only so many verses in a life. He tore open the lid again, furious. The ballerina sprang up. Spinning once. Twice. And smiled. This time, she had his face. Elias recoiled. The music began again, threading into his chest like a hooked wire. And with it, a flood of warmth. Comfort. False. Memory-like. He remembered being 6. Holding a music box that didn't exist. Winding it up in the dark when he was scared. Hearing his father's voice saying, "Close your eyes, son. The music keeps the monsters out." But now, he couldn't remember if that voice had ever belonged to his father. Or if the box had written it for him. He closed the lid again, hard. And something else vanished. He looked at his hand. Didn't recognize the scar across his knuckles. Didn't remember how he got it. Didn't remember fighting for Lena. Didn't remember How they met. The music box laughed. Not the ballerina. The box itself. A low, musical chuckle like a violin played backwards. From the grimoire, a line blazed across the page. He can silence the music, but not the silence it leaves behind. Elias stared down at the cursed thing. He couldn't destroy it. Not yet. It needed to be danced with. Endured. Resolved. But the longer he let it play, the deeper the melody would dig. And when the final verse ended, he wouldn't remember what he'd fought for at all. Then, beneath the inked chapter, a final instruction began to write itself. There is only one way to end the melody. Let someone else hear it. And choose not to dance. Elias looked at the box. Then at the door. He would have to share the melody. Let someone else feel the pull. Someone with nothing left to lose. Or someone who never learned to dance. Chapter 20. The City That Listens. Elias wrapped the music box in black cloth, tied it tight with butcher's twine, and placed it inside his satchel. It twitched once, even through the fabric. A tiny, involuntary spin of the ballerina. And though it didn't play aloud, he could feel it vibrating faintly, like a lullaby sung in another room, half heard through a wall made of memory. He didn't know where to go. Only that he had to leave. He had to give the melody a chance to be heard, and rejected. That was the key. Not destruction. Refusal. He stepped into the city. The air was damp. Electric. The streets buzzed with life, but it felt scripted. Like every face walking past was only pretending to have a place to be. He watched them all carefully. The man with the slouched shoulders and a bouquet in hand, already wilting. The woman pressing a phone to her ear, nodding at nothing. The teenage girl with headphones in, tears slipping beneath sunglasses. Elias could hear the music box humming now, low and constant, like it was tasting their grief. Find one, the grimoire whispered from inside the satchel. Find someone who will not dance when they hear the pain they could undo. The first person he offered it to was a man on a park bench. Mid-40s. Rough hands. Staring at pigeons like they owed him something. Elias sat beside him, heart thudding, and placed the box between them. The man looked down. Didn't question it. He opened it. The ballerina rose. Spun. And immediately the man's breath caught. His eyes glossed over. His lips parted. Elias saw him lean forward slightly, as if hearing a voice only he recognized. Then the man began to hum. Off-key. Mournful. Like he already knew the tune. Elias snatched the box back and slammed it shut. The man blinked. Looked at him. Did you say something? He didn't remember. Didn't even notice the ballerina's presence. But something in him was missing now. A look. A piece. A verse gone. Elias walked away quickly. The box giggled. The second attempt was a librarian. Quiet. Kind-eyed. Wore a crescent moon pin on her lapel. He handed her the box gently. She opened it without hesitation. The ballerina began to spin. The music curled through the air. The librarian smiled. And began to cry. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered, "He never knew. I never told him I forgave him." Then she closed the box slowly. Placed it back in Elias's hand. And turned away, vanishing into the stacks without another word. Elias sat there a long time. His hands trembling. Each time he tried, it stole a little more of him. His memories grew fainter. Lena's face now came to him in pieces, her eyes behind the ballerina's face, her voice a verse from the cursed melody. His own reflection looked like it had been drawn. Sketched in faint pencil. He was being erased. And still the box hummed. Still it whispered. And now, it sang his name. Elias. Elias the listener. Elias the last verse. He collapsed on a bus bench just before sunset. Empty-handed. Until someone sat beside him. A girl. No more than 9 years old. Quiet. Holding a notebook. She looked at him. Then at the box. And smiled. What's that? She asked. He hesitated. Something dangerous, he said. It sings what you miss most. The girl nodded slowly. Can I hear it? No, Elias whispered. Not unless you know how not to dance. The girl shrugged. My mom says if you listen too hard, songs get stuck in your bones. She stood. And walked away. Just like that. She didn't open it. Didn't ask again. Didn't need to. The box fell silent. Completely. Not paused. Not waiting. Stunned. Elias opened it cautiously. The ballerina didn't move. Her porcelain legs were cracked. And at the center of the platform where she once spun, a message had formed in ink. One has heard and turned away. The third verse ends. One cursed item remains. Chapter 21. The Journal That Writes You First. By the time Elias returned to his apartment, night had turned thick and wrong. The city no longer sounded like traffic and distant voices. It sounded like pages turning in the dark. He paused at the door, hand trembling over the knob. Because he already knew, something had changed. The weight of the 3 cursed items he'd already faced hung in the air like unfinished notes, from a song he couldn't stop hearing. His chest felt hollow, scraped clean by loss and ink. And still, the grimoire pulsed in his satchel, warm with some buried anticipation. As if it had been saving the best for last. He stepped inside. The apartment was too clean. No smoke. No ash. No humming. Just stillness. And in the center of the room, where the grimoire usually sat, a journal. Dark leather. Thin. Bound in red string. Resting on the table like it had always belonged there. Elias approached slowly. The air around it tingled, charged. He didn't recognize it, and yet he did. He reached out, hesitant. But when his fingers brushed the cover, he flinched. Because the cover was warm. And the faint impression of his own thumbprint was already there. The journal had been waiting for him. Or worse, it had come from him. He opened it. The first page was blank. But beneath the surface of the parchment, something shifted, like invisible words moving beneath a sheet of ice. He flipped forward. Page 2, full of writing. In his handwriting. He read. He comes home. He sees the journal. He thinks it's new. But he's wrong. He wrote it long ago, in a moment of forgetting. In a moment when the grimoire gave him the pen while he was dreaming. And now the story begins again. With truth he was never meant to remember. Elias slammed it shut. His hands were shaking. Because suddenly, memories he didn't know he'd buried began crawling back, slippery, malformed, unfinished. The journal wasn't just telling the future. It was rewriting the past. His past. He tore the string loose. Flipped through every page. Each one was filled with entries, his voice, his words, but describing things he hadn't done. Or things he might have done. Or things he'd wished he'd done. The night he kissed Lena in the rain, but he didn't. The letter he wrote to his father before the funeral, but never mailed. The moment he threw the grimoire into the sea, but didn't have the courage to follow it. Each event bled across the page like ghost ink. Moments from alternate versions of his life. Some hopeful. Some horrifying. All possible. None true. he reached the final page. The ink was still drying. It read, "He realizes the journal isn't recording his story, it's giving him a choice. Pick the chapter that becomes real. Choose your final lie." And beneath that, 3 headings began to write themselves in crimson script. 1. The life where she lived. 2. The life where he never found the grimoire. 3. The life where he became the devil's next author. Each one had a single blank page beneath it. Waiting for his hand. Waiting for ink. Waiting for his choice. The grimoire, silent for so long, now cracked open on its own. And whispered from across the room, "You may only write one ending. The rest will never have existed." Elias stared at the journal, at the pen beside it, at the flickering candle that lit the room in amber glow. The devil had not come to claim him. Not yet. Because Elias was being given the privilege of choosing how he'd be remembered. Or worse, of choosing which version of himself would be real. Chapter 22. The ending that devours the rest. The grimoire whispered behind him. "Only one story may survive." Elias stared at the 3 headings etched in his journal, each one humming, vibrating faintly with potential. Each a door. Each a trap. He reached for the pen. The obsidian shaft was cool and silent, as though waiting for blood more than ink. He hovered over the first heading. 1. The life where she lived. A world where Lena never died. Where the crash never happened. Where they married. Grew old. Fought about laundry and taxes. Laughed over breakfast. A life built not from fantasy, but from stolen truth, the truth that almost was. But he hesitated. Because it would be a lie lived too perfectly. And part of him knew Lena would never be real in that story. She'd be a character shaped by his desire. A puppet of regret. His hand drifted to the second option. 2. The life where he never found the grimoire. A quiet life. Safe. Small. Elias would wake every day with no knowledge of the cursed collection. No devil. No fire. No mirror of regret. No melody. He'd work in a bookstore. Maybe write poetry. Die peacefully. Forgotten. But would that version of him be brave? Would he matter? Would Lena still be gone? Would she ever have existed at all? And then, his hand reached the final option. 3. The life where he became the devil's next author. A path of fire. Of pages that whisper. Of rooms that bleed. A roll passed down, he would live forever, not as a man, but as the voice behind the collection. The one who tempts. The one who writes. The one who records the sins of others and feeds the book with them. Immortal, but alone. No Lena. No joy. Just ink and silence. He sat in the dark, staring at the choices. The journal waited still. The candle burned lower. The devil said nothing. Because Elias already knew. The cruelest thing about choice is that you never get to make more than one. He whispered her name. Lena. And in that moment, he knew what he couldn't let go of. Not safety. Not legacy. Her. He turned back to the first option. Trembling, he placed the pen to the page beneath. The life where she lived. And he began to write. She opened her eyes in the morning light, tangled in sheets that smelled like him. Alive. Whole. Real. And he woke beside her, remembering none of the curses, only the color of her laugh. The moment the ink dried, the journal hissed. The grimoire snapped shut behind him with a sharp crack. And the air bent, like heat rising off asphalt. Reality had begun to shift. At first, it was subtle. The ink from the other 2 endings began to fade. The pages dulled. Then curled. then vanished. The headings burned themselves off the page, leaving behind nothing. Then, the erasure spread. Elias stood and looked around the room. His books began to blur. The furniture shifted between forms, old, new, mismatched, like they didn't know what version of reality they belonged to anymore. And then, a photograph on the wall caught fire. Not literal flame. Memory flame. The image of him and Lena disintegrated. And then reformed. This time, she was laughing. This time, the crash had never happened. This time, she had never died. Elias smiled. And wept. But as the world rebuilt around him, he noticed something. A mirror. One he didn't remember owning. Cracked. Obsidian framed. And in its reflection, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man in black. Too tall. Too still. Face hidden in shadow. And in his hands the grimoire, rebinding itself. A voice, soft and knowing, spoke from the glass. The devil doesn't erase you. He promotes you. Chapter 23, The Debt Paid by Another. For 6 days, Elias lived in a dream. Lena was alive. Not in fragments. Not in shadow. But here. Breathing beside him. Laughing in the kitchen. Frowning over his coffee addiction. Sleeping with one hand on his chest, like she was afraid he'd vanish. And yet, it was he who had vanished. The version of him that had bled and suffered through cursed artifacts was gone, replaced by this gentler Elias. This one had never made a wish. Never found the grimoire. He was happy. But somewhere, deep in the marrow of his bones, he remembered that eye in flashes. In dreams. And in moments where Lena looked just a little too perfect in the morning light, and he realized. He had written this. On the 7th day, it rained, not a soft drizzle. A storm. Thunder that cracked the sky in two. And just past midnight, someone knocked at the door. 3 times. Slow. Heavy. Measured. Elias sat up. Lena stirred beside him. Did you hear that? He nodded. Slipped out of bed. His hand hovered over the doorknob. Because he knew. Before he opened it. Someone had inherited the weight. He opened the door. And there, standing in the hall, soaked through by rain, shaking like a leaf, was a boy. 17 maybe? Eyes wide and hollow. Lips trembling. And in his hands? A crimson book. Its cover scarred. Its eyes stitched shut, but twitching. The boy looked up at Elias and whispered. You're the one who gave it to me, aren't you? Elias froze. His throat went dry. No, he said. I didn't. You did, the boy insisted. You gave me the choice. You told me I could make it stop. I could wish it away. Elias stepped back, shaking his head. I don't remember. But he did. He remembered a dream, just 2 nights ago, sitting in a candlelit room, handing a stranger a pen. It's not so bad, he had said in the dream. You don't even remember what you gave up. The boy held out the book. It shook in his hands. I haven't written yet, he said. But it keeps writing me. Elias looked down at the journal. His journal. The one he thought he had closed forever. It now sat on his hallway table, open to a fresh page. The words were new. Dripping. And they read, Someone must remember the pain. So that you may forget. And beneath that, the story is balanced. For now. The boy's name was Milo. He didn't know why he was chosen. Only that the book had appeared. And a man, with Elias's face, had stood beside him in a fog of ink, offering him the chance to undo his greatest mistake. Elias let him inside. made him tea, watched him tremble as he turned the pages. Each cursed item Elias had faced now had Milo's name beside it. And when Elias looked at his own journal once more, he saw the newest entry. Elias remembers nothing, but his dreams are haunted by a boy who looks too much like he did once. And the grimoire smiles. That night, Elias stood over Milo as the boy slept on the couch. The rain still whispered outside. Lena hummed in the other room, unaware of the price being paid for their perfect life. And Elias, now only a ghost inside a paradise he chose, finally asked himself, was the ending worth the beginning? Chapter 24. The Reader Who Shouldn't Exist. Milo dreamed of fire, of pages screaming as they burned, of a voice whispering his name, not in malice, but in regret. When he woke, it was still dark. The rain had stopped. The city outside Elias's apartment held its breath. The grimoire sat on the table, closed, waiting. Elias stood at the window, unmoving. His reflection didn't blink. Milo rose slowly, eyes never leaving the crimson book. He should have run the moment he arrived. But something inside him, something that wasn't written, had pulled him toward it. And now, he understood. He wasn't just another reader. He wasn't a replacement. He was a remnant. A possibility erased when Elias rewrote reality. A scar left behind when someone chooses happiness without consequence. Elias turned. His face was pale, hollow-eyed. You're still here. Milo nodded. I don't know why I'm still me, he said quietly. You made your wish. You got your ending. Elias stepped forward. You're not supposed to exist. I know, Milo whispered. But I do. The grimoire shuddered. Pages fluttered without wind. A new chapter began to write itself in real time. The unwritten boy. A reader made of silence. A boy born from the margins. Not summoned. Not bound. Not authored. And therefore unreadable. Milo placed a hand on the cover. The stitched eye opened, wide and afraid. The book didn't resist him. It recognized him. But not as an heir. As an error. The one variable the devil had not accounted for. You gave away your ending, Milo said, looking at Elias. But someone had to carry the weight of the erased. I didn't know, Elias said. But the book did. The grimoire opened itself fully now, revealing not a page, but a mirror. And in that mirror Milo saw them all. Delphira, bound at the altar. Elias, writing his wish. Claire, Lena, the stitched ballerina, the masked watchers. Each of them, pieces of a puzzle built to consume pain and retell it. Again and again. Forever. Except him. He had no chapter. No title. No assigned grief. Milo leaned forward and whispered into the book. I was never written, so I'll write the end. The book didn't hiss. It didn't burn. It simply closed. And the candle on the table went out. Chapter 25. The Inkless Ending. The grimoire opened itself. No resistance. No hiss. It welcomed him now. As if the book finally understood what he was. Not a reader. Not a wisher. Not a victim. A flaw. Milo placed his palm on the title page. And the room split apart. The world did not shift. It peeled. Like pages turning backward too fast to track. Lena vanished. Elias screamed and folded into smoke. The apartment blurred, pixelated, forgot itself. And Milo stood, alone, in a space beyond design. A library with no walls. A cathedral built of broken promises. The archive of the damned. And at its center, seated upon a throne made of stitched-together covers from 1,000 cursed books, the devil. He looked nothing like fire or horns. He looked unfinished. His form flickered between librarian and lover, friend and monster, grief and hope. His face never stayed. But his eyes were the only thing the book had never dared describe. And now they looked at Milo like a puzzle piece that doesn't belong on the board. "You're early," the devil said. "I wasn't written," Milo answered. "No," the devil said. "You were forgotten." Milo stepped forward. "The collection is bound by story," he said. "But I am not story. I am what was left behind. You fed on readers' writers' regrets. You made puppets of pain and called them narratives." He opened the grimoire. Pages fluttered. Then stilled. The final one blank. Waiting. "I've come," Milo said, lifting the pen, "to end the book." The devil smiled. "You think the ending belongs to you? I think the ending," Milo whispered, "belongs to no one." And he stabbed the pen not into the page, but into his own palm. Blood struck parchment. But no words formed. Because the book didn't know what to write. Milo was never meant to be here. He was a memory left behind by Elias's erased life. A side character who survived deletion. And now, he had brought silence to the page. The grimoire screamed. The devil roared, not in rage but in fear. Because for the first time, the story was not shaping someone. Someone was shaping the story. Milo opened his mouth and spoke the final sentence. "This book ends now." The ink boiled. The pages caught fire, one by one. The devil rose, tried to flee, but there were no more pages left to hide in. No mirrors. No melodies. No dresses. No masks. Only flame. Only Milo. And then nothing. Silence. Somewhere, in the soft morning light of a different world, Elias opened his eyes. Beside him, Lena stirred. The grimoire was gone. No journals. No ink. No memory of fire. Just peace. And a single note on the windowsill, scrawled in faint graphite. "The Devil's Damned Collection has been closed. The last reader was never written." Epilogue, the shelf that remains. In a bookstore no one remembers. On a street that appears only when the moon is thin and watching. There is a shelf. It is empty. Dustless. Clean. As if something was once there, and taken. Or erased. Customers never notice it. They walk past it, sensing only a faint chill. Sometimes they pause, just long enough to feel the wrongness. Then quickly move on. The bookseller never touches it. He used to. He used to straighten the volumes that whispered from that shelf. Bind their spines, sew back the pages with trembling thread. But not anymore. Now, when asked what belonged there, he only shrugs. "No record," he says. "No title. Must have been misfiled." But late at night, when the door is locked, and the lights are low, and the ink in the ledgers runs backward, he sometimes sees a boy standing in front of the shelf. Not touching. Not speaking. Just watching the space. Where a book once sat that never had a name. Somewhere far away, a man lives with a woman he loves. They never speak of the time before. They remember nothing. But sometimes, when the wind shifts and the shadows fall a certain way, he dreams of a journal. A mirror. A spinning dancer. And a boy whose name he never knew. The collection is closed. But the shelf still stands. Waiting. Because stories don't die. They just wait for a reader with the right kind of silence in their heart. And the courage to pick up the pen.
Every story has an ending. but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.